Yeah, right. Well, thank you. Welcome, everybody. This is the House Committee on General and Housing. Today is Wednesday, March 12th, 2025, all day, and we're here. So we're going to start with the Joint Fiscal Office's presentation to us of their fiscal note on the housing bill, the committee housing bill that we've been discussing ad nauseam. And then at 10 o'clock, we're going to hear testimony concerning H461, an act relating to employee access to unpaid leave. What doesn't show on our calendar, but will be on our calendar are two things. First of all, we should come back here after the floor. The floor is at 1, however long it is, let's reconvene afterwards. Second of all, what we're looking for is a possible vote on 461. And whether it comes now after the testimony this morning, since there is time before lunch, or whether it comes late this afternoon, we'll see how it goes, but it's a possible vote. So, do you know the people in this room?
I'm fairly new.
Yeah, I think we should introduce ourselves. Do you want to start, Lenora?
Sure. Hi, good morning. Leonora Dodge, rep from Essex Town and City of Essex.
Joe Parsons, Newbury, Thompson, and Groff.
Hi, John Charlton, Athens, Chester, Grafton, and Wyndham.
I'm Debbie Dolgan. I represent St. Johnsbury, Concord, and Kirby.
Gail Pezzo, Chittenden 20, Colchester, welcome.
Morning, I'm Mary Howard and I represent Rutland City District 6.
Good morning, I'm Elizabeth Burrows and I represent Windsor 1, which is Heartland, West Windsor, and Windsor.
And I'm Mark Mahaly. I was actually looking at your, I'm Mark Mahaly, and I represent Calais, Plainfield, and Marshfield, and I'm chair. Welcome. Why don't you introduce yourself and take it away? Tell us about.
Morning, Chair, committee members. For the record, I'm James Duffy, fiscal analyst with the Legislative Joint Fiscal Office. Here today to go through the draft fiscal note that JFO has prepared for the committee bill. We've been working closely with Cameron Wood, who I know you've heard a lot from and been working closely on this bill. So I believe everybody has a printed out copy of this fiscal note in front of them. Just a quick kind of statement.
Let me just interrupt you. It's on our website, right? For those who are listening in or sitting in the room, it's the fiscal note is on our website under today.
And Chairman Hawley, would you prefer that I share my screen so that the
I think that would be great. Yeah.
Right, so just a quick kind of statement to situate us. This document,
Can you make it a little bigger?
yeah. Let's say draft at the top and you'll notice some highlights throughout. However, that is really only because this bill does not yet have a bill number assigned to it. Otherwise, the information here is current with the current bill draft and ready for walkthrough. And there is one other highlight in table 1, which we'll get to. I know there's active discussion between Cameron and the committee on that item in table 1. So I'll have to say, this is the fiscal note for the committee bill, an act relating to housing and housing development. I'll just start off with a quick top line number. I don't think there will be any surprises for committee members in this fiscal note. The vast majority of the top line number for this fiscal note comes from the various appropriations that are enumerated in the bill. So that number is $73,406,500. As you can see, the vast majority of that is for appropriations for the various programs, staff positions, and studies that are authorized by this bill. And then there is this comparatively small number, $250,000 for fiscal year 2026, which would cover the cost of the extension of the 2 affordable housing tax credits that are extended in the bill. Yes.
Two thoughts. One is just for the committee's information. what essentially this fiscal note is doing is taking what's in our bill under appropriations and examining it from the fiscal perspective, and that's where these totals come from. Of course, and I was before House appropriations yesterday, and of course, they have something like 20 times more requests than there is money. And so in the end, whatever they do is what it is. It's so that this is preliminary in that sense. One of the things, James, is it James? You
Yes.
might want to do is double check on the $250,000 tax credit. The reason is, my impression is there are, well, I can never remember correctly.
Feels like there's two.
There's two programs.
Yes.
One is for the rental, the buy down of the, it's to buy down the cost for first time home buyers. And one is to cover a grant program for first generation home buyers. I think it's 250,000. It just goes forever rather than, so that might be right, but double check that it's not 500,000. I think it's 250.
As of the last version of the bill that I've reviewed, which I believe is the most current one, it's a $250,000 first year credit,
Yeah.
which repeats for an additional 4 years
Yes.
for each individual claimant. Or rather, I mean, not for individual claimants, but for subsequent 4 years with a 5-year period.
And then after that, it goes, I think it's still 250, but it goes on after that. And I think, so I don't think it's 500 at any point, but I'm not, would you just double check? Okay,
And
please proceed. I'm sorry, I just wanted to.
no, thank you, Chair. And you're correct that there are two programs. The reason, and they both authorize $250,000 first year tax credit allocation. So that's the down payment assistance program and the first generation first time home buyer program. However, the reason that first fiscal year 26 tax credit number is only 250,000 and not 500,000, representing the sum of both, is because the down payment assistance program has already been authorized to issue
Through 26.
credits through fiscal year 2026 through previous legislation. And so there's no additional fiscal year 26 cost in this bill for the down payment assistance program. This bill authorizes that program to continue from fiscal year 27 through fiscal year 31. And so the for 26, the only additional expenditures comes from that first generation home buyer.
Right, okay, thank you.
And so that brings us back up to the top line overview here. Again, that's approximately 73.4 million top line number, in addition to the $250,000 appropriation for the first generation first time home buyer assistance program. From here, the fiscal note really just runs through the various appropriations. Happy to discuss any of them in more detail. I suspect that the committee members are familiar with them, having compiled the bill and put it together. But what you'll see here in the fiscal note, table 1, just kind of enumerates those different appropriations. To circle back to this highlighted piece at the top of the table, I think there was discussion about this with Cameron in committee yesterday, that the bill text currently is ambiguous as to what entity receives the appropriation for that $15,000 Universal Design Study Committee. And so that's the only reason that text is highlighted.
We determined in committee it would be VHFA. However, Cameron is going to check with VHFA as to whether they would agree with that.
Yeah, and we've messaged a little bit about that back and forth. It seems like Department of Housing and Community Development may be the more appropriate entity.
Okay.
That's not confirmed yet, but it's looking like DHCD might be
Would that be okay with you?
Yep.
Okay,
and Cameron can get into the details of why that is.
It
But
does make more sense.
I don't think there have been appropriations of this kind to the HFA in recent years, which brings us the question about whether it would be a permissible appropriation to them and whether DHCD isn't a stronger fit. Table 2 summarizes, again, we reviewed this briefly already, but the cost schedule from fiscal year 26 through fiscal year 31 for those two extended affordable housing tax credit programs. So you'll see that cost for the two programs increases by the same amount year over year until it eventually reaches the maximum of 2.5 million in 2031, at which point the down payment assistance program would expire or need to be reauthorized. But that amount of 1.25 million for the first generation homebuyer program represents the plateau of year-over-year costs for that program. So it increases by $250,000 each year until it reaches that amount. And my understanding is it's that plateaued amount for all subsequent 5-year periods.
So it really is extra. In other words, it's not that the first generation program is paid for by the same 250,000 extending into the future after 2031. It is paid for by an additional 250,000 starting this year, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
starting this year, there's a permanent
That's fine. That's
allocation
what I
of
understood.
first year.
Right, that's what I understood, and that, to remind the committee, allows them to make $15,000 grants to first generation homebuyers. Okay, thank you.
From here, the fiscal note just provides, again, a more detail about each of these appropriations. Happy to go into any detailed follow-up questions about any of these in particular. You'll see it just kind of breaks them down. It follows the order of the sections in the bill in which these appropriations are authorized. So it starts with section 6 under affordable housing tax credits, and then proceeds up from there through section 18, section 19, section 20, where those various appropriations are authorized.
By the way, again, I'm just using this as an opportunity to update the committee, if you'll forgive me. What I discovered yesterday when I appeared before the House Appropriations Committee was the following. Do you remember when Maura Collins was in here? She indicated that it would be helpful to them if the funding for the two middle income programs was combined into one appropriation. Because in a way they, remember she was saying that they really address somewhat different pieces of the market, and she'd like the flexibility to move back and forth depending on the conditions. So therefore, in our letter to the Appropriations Committee, and in my testimony, I mentioned that it wasn't 10 million and 10 million, it was 20 million combined. And the committee had not heard that. Tiff Bloomley, who is Representative Bloomley, who's the housing person on the committee, had not yet the first that she had heard of. So I promised that I would get back to them. I explained why. I emailed Maura Collins. She has replied saying she will get in touch with the Appropriations Committee and explain it. And I sat down with Tiff Bloomley and explained it as well. I just wanted you to update you that that was going on. Please proceed. And it's combined here in his tables.
Is that the middle income home ownership development?
Because you'll see it's two programs, middle income home ownership and rental housing revolving loan fund.
One note, while we have kind of zeroed in on the table, which I realized I wanted to point out, was vast majority of these funds of this 73.156 that are appropriated for these various programs come from the general fund and are appropriated to the various receiving agencies, entities, et cetera. The exception to that is the $1.825 billion, which is appropriated from the opioid abatement special fund. All other funds, otherwise the general fund. And I did want to raise for the committee that in reviewing the most recent bill text, it seemed to me like there might be a similar situation with the language for this appropriation from the opioid abatement fund, as there is with the residential universal design study, in that it wasn't immediately clear to me from JFO's point of view the mechanism by which that money flows to the residential service providers through
This was section 20 of our bill.
It's what page, so what you're talking about is page 35.
yes,
Wow.
other appropriations, that last batch of appropriations in section 20.
Okay, that is. I see. Okay, yes, this is. Well, it's to the Department of Health.
Yes, and the language, let me pull up the bill text. The language for one piece of that appropriation in particular, it might have been the last one, said that the funding was for first month services, first month's fees for residential services, and should pull up the language, but
Right,
that was the one piece where it wasn't clear to me in the text immediately if that flowed to an agency, and then to qualified, residential.
well, at the moment, the way it's written, I mean, this is something where I think you should connect. Camera, yeah, but the way it's written, it says the following shall be appropriated to the Department of Health, and then everything follows that.
Mhm.
So it's all the Department of Health.
Or grants.
Right. And again, just for the committee to update you, this recovery housing, right? This is recovery housing. This is the request of recovery housing. The governor's budget is substantially less. It turns out that Health and Human Services, the Human Services Committee also is recommending a budget for recovery residences. It's a little less. It's just a different number. So we have two bills with different numbers. I talked to the chair of Human Services and she's fine, thinks it's just fine. Two bills. It's just essentially two inputs to the committee, to the Appropriations Committee. And the Appropriations Committee is going to have to just decide what to do. I mean, they could zero everybody out, or they could fund somewhere in the middle. Whatever they do, they'll do. But it's important that they know about the potential duplication so they don't end up inadvertently, word forbid, appropriating $4 million. So I alerted to that, and they know about that.
Well, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think JFO will be bouncing that off of Cameron,
Okay,
just to give you all notice that might come up in.
And it probably would. It wouldn't hurt. This is my prior life at the Appropriations Committee. It wouldn't hurt for you to talk to Maria Blair.
Yes.
She's the JFO assigned to the committee, the Appropriations Committee, and she should know that there's this potential duplication and just watch out for it. So we don't end up with losing an extra $2 million in the budget that we.
So, yeah, that's absolutely right. So I'm on the revenue team at the Joint Fiscal Office, and we do have a budget team that we work obviously in very close partnership with. And this week of all weeks is probably one of the most crucial ones that we be exchanging information. So we definitely shall.
One of the reasons the Appropriations Committee has a rather large room is because as the midnight oil is burned on the budget, there's usually 3, sometimes 4 JFO members in the room.
So I'll pause here in case there are any questions on this fiscal note. From here on out, it really does just continue to enumerate the different appropriations. The next section details these one-time appropriations to non-state housing service providers or non-government service providers, NeighborWorks America, Home Share Vermont, sort of thing. And then that takes you to the end of the fiscal note. That's the last batch of appropriations that are described. So I'm happy to take any questions on the fiscal note in general, or any specific pieces.
let's just take a minute for the committee a minute of silence while the committee studies this. Forget, we're going to. Okay. Two, that time is 3, 5, 67. 57, I keep getting that wrong, yeah. And we have to have a little testimony and then propose language to appropriations on that issue. And were you here yesterday when it was suggested to us that we ask Tim Duggan and Ashlyn Doyen to come in? They're knowledgeable about salaries. So, does the committee have additional questions for James? James, thank you so much. I really appreciate the work that went into this and your continued attention.
Right. Thank you.
So I want to just briefly go over what I was just talking to Magali about. I think a number of you know, but perhaps just to repeat, age 57, which we voted out of committee, the survivor benefit package, which we voted out of committee. In appropriations. Appropriations felt that there was a problem with the bill in that state employees have a death benefit in their contract, and it's substantial. And some non-state employees, such as local police, for example, or may have, depending on their contract, may have survivor benefits as well. And they were worried about duplication. So the question was what to do. One option would have been to bounce the bill back to us to determine, but a better option was to hold the bill in appropriations. And for us to take whatever testimony we needed to and to suggest to appropriations language, which then they would amend the bill there in their committee and it would go out. The terrific advantage of the latter is that it doesn't have to happen this week because they have until next week. Nonetheless, as I was talking to Magali, if we have time, we should hear it as soon as we reasonably can so we can get the language to us, because I know that next week in appropriations is going to be nuts. And they're already going to be having our committee bill come to them. So sooner rather than later is a way to go. I do have some ideas which we can talk about. We can talk about, possible solutions. I don't see this as an obstacle that can't be overcome. I mean, I think it can be. Mary?
I do see this as an obstacle. The firefighters got their appropriation through. So why wasn't it brought up then?
I don't know. You know, you're.
Why is it being brought up now?
Yeah. In other words, this issue, the issue of potential duplication, somehow the bill made it out of this committee onto the floor and through the floor last year without this issue coming up. And it's coming up now. But it is come up. And so we have to deal with it. And I think there are ways to deal with it.
The workers' comp benefit covers every state work employee. It was voted on last year to cover the firefighters for a reason. I do not understand what the holdup is in appropriations when it passed all the way through and no one questioned. If you want to go back to your constituents and your firefighters and your correctional officers and say, oh, sorry, you're covered by a life insurance policy through workers' comp, be my guest.
Well, I think what we'll do is we will try to get some evidence before us quickly. We're just talking. I'm briefing our vice chair. We had a JFO report presented to us.
Love it.
Which goes through carefully and lists all of the appropriations that were in our bill. And also the tax credit, the tax expenditures.
Great.
And now I'm just was briefing the committee on the need to at least take a little testimony and suggest language, if necessary, to appropriation. Yes,
I want to say, I've spoken to you, Mary.
Right. Yes, I appreciate
I'm
that.
not willing to let this go. I already have a list of witnesses that I would like to come in and testify. I'll get them over to you. We talked about,
Ashland and Tim were mentioned.
yeah, so them, and then I think we need to get somebody, I'll get.
We might,
Definitely need someone from the VSEA testify.
I think that.
Again.
Yeah, I do think though, I'll tell you what my concern is. I want this bill to make it out. And so it has to be, the advantage of it being an approach is that it doesn't have to make it out this week.
Yeah.
It can make it out next week. I'm a little leery of approach time, next week. So I think if we can manage it with everything else we've got going, we should take this testimony this week, get the language. I have some ideas for very simple language that would deal with this, but get it out of here and just send the language to approach. We can literally walk it over there and they have it. And so we don't wait till next week to do it.
Absolutely, and I'm ready and fully prepared to do that.
Our next item isn't due until 10:30. It's still, when is it? 10. So let me just ask, I wanted to ask about our ongoing issues around our big committee bill. Joe,
I am good.
did you figure out, are you satisfied?
I talked to the tax department this morning and thoroughly satisfied.
Okay. All right, so the issue that could impose some sort of, as yet undefined pressure.
They're not looking to do that.
Okay,
If the information's there, great. If that line is lacking some information, as long as it's sent to them.
perfect. I have provided language draft language to Cameron. And this is on VHIP. Remember, I told you that there were some, Cameron, when he was here, he testified as to some small minor changes in the VHIP, which were all approved by everybody. They were really technical changes, but one thing that came up was the idea. I think the concern is everybody knows the road ahead for the homeless is going to be rocky, or rockier than it already is. And so there's a real concern that we have good data on that. And I think Sean Gilpin was very clear that they're really willing to provide that. I think the feeling upstairs in the House committee was, it would really be nice if it was in the statute. So I drafted some language that basically asked them on an annual basis to report to the relevant committees the number of people that were housed under each of the 5 and 10-year program. And also, and this is a particular concern that Human Services has, what happens after the expiration of the 5-year or 10-year? And so they asked just that we know the number of units that are expiring, and if the information is there, what is what is happening to the tenants and the rent? And I don't think there's not any interest, and it didn't put it in there, in trying to extend. I mean, it's clear what happens after the 5-year or 10-year mark, which is that the owner can then rent to anyone they want, and they no longer have to rent at HUD fair market value, which is pretty low. I mean, it's substantially lower than fair market value, than actual fair market value. After it expires, I'm pretty sure that they're just free to rent at fair market value.
Yes.
And,
Or rent or whatever.
yeah, and whatever they can, rent it, and not HUD fair market value, just whatever the market will bear. I think it's fair to say that in certain areas, the market won't bear a lot more. It just depends, but they're really free to do that. There's no question about that. That's the nature of these programs. This is just trying to find out what's happening. What is that? Personally, I'm just speaking for myself. I don't know what the easy solution would be, because those units can't be you know how VHCB has a statutory obligation to try to preserve affordable units? It's not like VHCB can come in and buy those units, because it would be very difficult for a nonprofit to manage all these scattered units all over the place. So, it could be an issue, but this is just data collection. Yes.
Yeah. And I'd say I wouldn't want them to. I would want them to just go on to the market as a
Yeah.
regular, because right now we don't really participate in the fair market of
Right.
rental housing because we don't have one. We're at ridiculously low vacancy rates. So you get to charge what you charge or find somewhere else. It'd be nice to have a 2, 3, 4% vacancy rate where people actually have to compete to get somebody to move into there.
It would be nice. Yes.
I'd like to know also the degree to which those particular units are converted into short-term rentals after 5 or 10 years. Because that's also another possibility.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's
Go
okay.
ahead.
When someone has a voucher for a HUD unit, are they only paying, is the landlord only receiving that money from the voucher, or is there supplement from the renter that can be paid?
Here's my understanding, and Chris Donnelly is in the room and can correct me if I'm wrong. Chris, you want to introduce yourself?
Chris Donnelly, the Champlain Housing Trust.
Champlain Housing Trust, remember, is one of the 5. What do you call them?
Regional nonprofit.
Or something, there's a word for it in VHIP, which I could look up in the bill. That this program. And that is, they actually receive the money, pay it, they identify the units, they pay the up to 50,000 plus 20,000, they pay to the landlord, they make sure they match up. Working with, what's it called? The coordinated entry program, they match up the landlord with the homeless individual or family, depending on the size of the unit, et cetera. My understanding is that a landlord in a Section 8, that's what they receive. They don't receive any more. They can receive, the Section 8 can actually be more than HUD fair market value, rarely, but it can be. They receive whatever the Section 8 is. Am I right?
That's in Vermont. It could be different in other states. I had Section 8 when I was in college many years ago as a single parent. And I paid
More?
I paid my share and the HUD voucher paid, I think it was 500 and something, and I had to pay another 300. The rents are very, very steep in Long Island.
The renter pays a third of their income. And the voucher pays the rest up to the fair market rent, or perhaps at times a little bit more accounted for.
Okay, so it is the voucher and they're paying,
Yeah.
they're paying.
The total amount together is the same.
Okay,
The total amount is,
The total amount of what the renter pays plus the voucher, depending, it doesn't matter what the voucher will cover whatever's remaining up to fair market rent.
up to fair market, not HUD fair market.
Sorry.
HUD fair market, okay. Which is why there's an increasing problem in matching people with the units because there aren't enough vouchers. Okay,
Or units.
yeah,
or units.
yeah. So Magali, we really can't proceed until 10, can we? Or we don't have the witnesses we need. Are we,
I believe Sophie might be available earlier, so I can message her.
and Megan?
Megan is not going to be available until around 11.
Until around 11. Okay,
What was planned was a walkthrough from 10 to 11 and then testimony. From
Right.
11 to 12.
okay. All right, is there any other hanging chad with respect to the housing bill that you want to discuss at the moment?
Was that inclusion of home ownership centers, what you were just referring to, in who they're gonna, Human Services is gonna coordinate with?
Because you're renting, not home ownership.
Because we've.
The only thing we talked about,
Because it was the department shall coordinate with local coordinated entries, and upstairs they added home ownership centers.
right, they added.
Which is what you're referencing.
Right, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
It was apparently the process, the exact process of how the matching is done. I think the home ownership centers understands it. I think HCD understands it, but I didn't think anyone else in the room understood it. And so we just added and the home. So everybody's collaborating, yeah. Yes.
I'm sorry, I don't know if I'm the only one who's confused, but I thought this was all rental. It coordinates with home ownership centers because of the landlord ownership being involved, like.
No, I'll tell you what.
It's okay.
Chris, would you just come sit down and let's deal with this? We have a few minutes. We can deal with this. Would you
Am I
explain?
the only one who's confused?
No,
Because if I'm the only one, I could
I think
totally
you're
take
not
this
the only
offline.
one. I have learned if you think you're confused and you fantasize you are the only one, you're usually wrong.
Okay.
Chris, how does
Chris
this work?
Donnelly with the Champlain Housing Trust.
How's
So the five organizations that are grantees all have departments within our organizations that are called the homeownership centers. Because years ago, when that function was created, it was really about creating homebuyer education programs, so forth, and those kind of functions have evolved to do lending. And so this is a lending program. We used to just do lending to the single family homes through a certain program. Now the lending goes through a whole variety of programs. So it's just the name of the departments within these organizations,
Okay,
known as the homeownership centers.
that makes.
Okay, so how
So it just, how does
what I think I'd like you to explain is what is the matching process? What is the role of the coordinated entry lead agencies? Who are they? And what is the role of the homeownership centers?
So the property owners come to the homeownership centers asking for the loan or the grant. We work with them, we provide those resources, do the underwriting. And then when the work is done, then we work with coordinated entry to match them with the
What are the coordinated?
coordinated entries are
What are they?
these are
Yo-yo.
yeah, they're a collection of homeless service providers that work in regions to keep a list of folks who are experiencing homelessness and find placements for them in permanent.
So it's a central database.
It's a central database, or in my region, it'll be COTS and CBOEO, and there's pathways, there's all these variety of homeless service providers that work through coordinated entry to keep that list and to provide the names to hopefully streamline the process to get people into.
And that list contains information like how big is it a family?
Yes, family, what needs are, who the service provider is, all those needs.
So that's available to you. And then you see it's a 2-bedroom unit like this and you look for someone.
Coordinated entry will say, we have a 2-bedroom unit. They'll say, here's a family. Move it. And so here's your names. Yeah. And so, yeah.
What is the coordinated entry coverage for the entire state?
I know Chittenden County better, in Franklin County a little bit. So there's a group in Franklin County that works, Franklin Grand Isle. And then there's a group in Chittenden County, the Chittenden County Homeless Alliance. I believe there will be local, what they're called continuums of care, which is a HUD mandated process. So the continuum of care organizations in different regions will have, so there'll be one in Brattleboro, they're regional. So
And there's
local-
10 regions?
I can't say for sure, but
Well, I've said this before, but this is a great concern to me. And in where I represent Windsor One, which is in the Upper Valley, we have to, our coordinated entry includes that region in New Hampshire as well.
okay.
So
Sure.
it's becomes a much bigger population than just
Sure.
Vermont is.
Yeah.
And so the problems are financial as well as
It's a variety of
manpower.
programs and just, yeah. Can imagine it being challenging.
So just Lenore, does that help?
Yeah, that helped tremendously. I was just confused by.
Any other questions in that regard? Thank you.
Yep.
At this point, I think what we'll do is we'll adjourn until 10 o'clock when our witnesses arrive, but